Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. For years now, Harry Potter fans have been locked in debate. Some believe the movies were brilliant, while others argue that the adaptation stripped away too much of the story. And it's true, countless vibrant and funny moments were cut, leaving viewers without the magical humor so unique to J.K. Rowling's books. Today, let's dive into the scenes that made us laugh in the books, but somehow never made it to the big screen. Get comfy, this is going to be fun. Number 1, Fred and George. Throwing snowball at Voldemort? When Professor Quirrell first appeared in the Philosopher's Stone, he seemed like a shy, stuttering teacher. But by the end, we found out Voldemort was hiding under his turban. Now picture this. Fred and George enchant some snowballs to pelt Quirrell right on the back of the head, which means, unknowingly, the twins gave the Dark Lord himself a snowy smackdown. Hard not to smile remembering that. A real shame it never made the film. Number 2, Mrs. Weasley's sweaters and the twins' signature wit. In the Philosopher's Stone film, we see Harry and Ron receiving knitted Christmas jumpers from Mrs. Weasley. But in the book, Fred and George also got theirs, with their initials, of course, and they didn't miss the chance to crack a joke. "You haven't got any letters on yours," said George to Ron. "I suppose she thinks you don't forget your name, but we're not stupid. We know we're called Gred and Forge." Number 3, Harry swears and Dumbledore pretends not to hear. In Goblet of Fire, Hagrid is devastated after Rita Skeeter exposes his giant heritage. He hides away in his hut, and Dumbledore visits to comfort him. Harry happens to walk in and, in a burst of outrage, calls Skeeter something, let's say, unflattering. Dumbledore, with his usual calm, simply replies, "I beg your pardon. I think I might have gone temporarily deaf just then." That dry Dumbledore humour, always a delight, and dearly missed in the films. Number 4, Dobby, the only one excited about Hermione's hats. Remember how Hermione starts knitting hats to free house elves in Goblet of Fire? She leaves them all over the Gryffindor common room, but as it turns out, only Dobby collects them. The other elves are horrified by the idea of freedom and refuse to go anywhere near the place. Meanwhile, Dobby struts around proudly, wearing every hat and scarf he can find, like a magical fashion icon. Missing this in the film was truly a lost opportunity for both charm and comedy. Number 5, Molly Weasley forgets about Fred and George. When Ron becomes a prefect, Mrs. Weasley beams with pride and exclaims, "It's a family tradition." To which Fred and George both raise their eyebrows. What are we then? Next-door neighbours? That subtle favoritism, classic Molly, and it perfectly captured the quirky dynamics of the Weasley household. Sadly, the films rarely explored these moments. Number 6, Dumbledore's chat with the Dursleys. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore shows up at Privet Drive to collect Harry, but he doesn't miss the chance to confront Vernon and Petunia. With enchanted glasses of mead floating around the room and bumping into heads, he delivers a polite yet piercing lecture about their years of mistreatment. It's one of the most satisfying scenes in the books and completely ignored in the adaptation. Number 7, Ginny, not just the quiet girl. The films seriously shortchange Ginny Weasley, especially her sharp wit. In Half-Blood Prince, after she starts dating Harry, she tells some starstruck girls that he has a tattoo of a hippogriff. Or wait, was it a dragon? Sounds cooler, doesn't it? The scene captures the real chemistry between Ginny and Harry, not awkward kisses in silence, but vibrant, teasing energy. Number 8, Archie's pajamas at the Quidditch World Cup. The Quidditch World Cup was packed with magic, noise, and chaos, but one of the funniest moments had nothing to do with brooms. It came from Archie, a cheerful old wizard wandering through the campgrounds in a bright red nightgown, no trousers, just flapping fabric and pride. A ministry worker rushed over, horrified. "You're supposed to be blending in." he whispered. "Magical folk are supposed to dress like muggles." Archie just grinned. "I like a healthy breeze around my privates, thanks," he said. "Besides, I bought this in a muggle shop. Muggles wear them. Women, at least." His logic was flawless and completely ridiculous. Around him, wizards were trying everything to fit in. Suits over dragon boots, kilts with ponchos, top hats and wetsuits. But Archie stood out like a red flag. And he didn't care. His confidence, his comfort, and that one unforgettable line made him a fan favorite, even with just a few lines of dialogue. The films erased him. No red nightgown, no breeze, no laugh-out-loud misunderstanding of Muggle fashion. It was a missed gem, a perfect moment of whimsical world-building that showed just how delightfully clueless some wizards could be. Archie deserved his spotlight, and so did his pajamas. Number 9. Percy's mashed potato incident. Dinner at the Burrow was never quiet, but on one evening in Goblet of Fire things got especially loud and messy. Percy Weasley, puffed up with self-importance after landing a job at the Ministry, was lecturing the table. His voice was stiff, his tone unbearable. Fred and George couldn't resist. They began imitating him. "Yes, Father," George said in a pompous voice. "Mr. Crouch wants me to bring him a cup of tea. Very important work." Fred added, "Percy practices speeches in front of the mirror. He bows to himself." Laughter erupted. Even their father chuckled. But Percy, he exploded. Red-faced and spluttering, he grabbed his spoon, still loaded with mashed potatoes, and pointed it in fury. A flick of the wrist and the spoon slipped. The potatoes flew. They hit the ceiling with a splat and stuck. For a long second, everyone stared at the white blob dripping over the chandelier. Then the room burst into laughter. Percy stormed out, leaving his dignity and his potatoes behind. "That's what he gets for being so pompous," Ron muttered through giggles. Molly sighed, but even she cracked a smile. It was chaos, love, and humour all rolled into one. Classic Weasley. The films gave us many magical meals, but not this one. They skipped the potatoes, skipped the ceiling, skipped the moment that perfectly captured what it meant to grow up in the Weasley household, where jokes flew as fast as spells, and mashed food could be a weapon of pride. Number 10, Hermione attacks Ron with birds. Hermione didn't cry, she didn't run, she attacked with birds. In Half-Blood Prince, after walking in on Ron snogging Lavender Brown in the common room, Hermione stormed out in silence. Moments later, she summoned a flock of enchanted canaries. They circled her head, glowing and chirping like little sparks of fury. Then Ron walked in, clueless, smirking, still tasting sugar from Lavender's lips. Hermione turned. Her voice was cold. "Opugno!" The birds shot forward like arrows. They chased Ron around the room, pecking, clawing, flapping. He yelped, shielding his head, tripping over furniture. It was war, and he was completely outmatched. Harry stood frozen. He knew better than to interfere. In the book, it says he pretended to examine the contents of his bag to hide his laughter. That line alone turned the scene from raw drama into comedy. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was teenage chaos, brilliant and wild. Hermione wasn't a victim. She was a force of nature. The film cut this scene completely. We only saw Hermione cry, hiding behind curtains. Her fire was gone. The rage turned to quiet sorrow. And the humor erased. What could have been a powerful, hilarious moment, full of emotion, character, and magic, was reduced to silence and shadows. But the books remembered. They gave us the birds, the spell, the chaos. They reminded us Hermione Granger wasn't just the smartest witch in the room. She had a temper, a wand, and no time for betrayal. Number 11, Harry tries to convince McGonagall about Malfoy. Harry was convinced. Draco Malfoy was up to something, and it wasn't just teenage moodiness. In Half-Blood Prince, he stormed into Professor McGonagall's office, practically vibrating with frustration. "He's a Death Eater," Harry said. I know it." McGonagall raised an eyebrow. Calm, sharp, unmoved. "Potter," she replied, "are you quite sure? Perhaps he simply enjoys being dramatic. It is, after all, his family specialty." Her voice was crisp, but her sarcasm cut deep. Harry flinched. He wasn't used to teachers rolling their eyes at his warnings. The beauty of the scene was McGonagall's balance. She didn't dismiss Harry out of cruelty, she just wasn't ready to follow a hunch. And her dry wit, unmatched, one line, one eyebrow. And she managed to make the whole room lighter, even as war crept closer. It was the kind of subtle humour that reminded readers this was still a school, with teachers, homework, and occasional sarcasm. But the film skipped it. No arched brow, no razor-sharp comeback, just tension and silence. The loss wasn't just a missed laugh, it was a missed chance to show how grounded and human these characters really were. McGonagall's wit was a shield, and in that moment it protected both her and Harry. Number 12. Peeves says goodbye to Umbridge. Peeves was chaos in a bowler hat. The poltergeist haunted Hogwarts like a prank-loving ghost, with no rules, no shame, and no respect for authority. In Order of the Phoenix, his finest moment came after Fred and George Weasley staged their legendary exit. As fireworks faded and swamp water spread through the corridors, Peeves took up the torch, literally. Dolores Umbridge, now disgraced and furious, stormed through the halls, trying to restore order. Peeves tailed her like a gremlin with a grudge. He pelted her with chalk, banged trash can lids, and shrieked from the rafters. Then came the farewell. With one final, glorious salute, Peeves declared, "It unscrews the other way, you silly girl," helping her lose a doorknob battle before gleefully howling, "Give her hell from us, Peeves!" The teachers didn't stop him. They didn't even try. Professor McGonagall, usually stern, actually told Peeves how to loosen a chandelier bolt. It was the only time Peeves took orders from a staff member, and he did it with style. The entire school was united for once in silent joy as Umbridge lost her grip on power. The movies erased all of it. Peeves never made it to the screen, no shrieking farewell, no airborne chalk, no poetic vengeance on behalf of every student Umbridge had tormented. It was one of the funniest, most satisfying moments in the series, and fans still miss it. Number 13, Ron meets the garden gnomes. The Weasley garden was a war zone, not with spells, but with gnomes. In the Chamber of Secrets, Ron invited Harry to help de-gnome the backyard. What followed was chaos. Gnomes, small and potato-like, screeched and kicked as the boys grabbed them by the ankles and spun them like slingshots. "You've got to chuck them hard," Ron said, "or they just come back." Harry watched, unsure if this was wizarding pest control or a sport. But Ron dove in with enthusiasm until one gnome bit him. It latched onto his finger with tiny teeth and squealed like it was having the time of its life. "Get her off!" Ron shouted, shaking his hand. The gnome held on. Even the gnomes were having fun. Fred and George found it hilarious. They explained that gnomes were too stupid to understand they weren't wanted. "They just keep coming back," George said. "It's like a game for them." The scene was messy, loud, and perfectly magical. It was also one of the funniest glimpses into how weird wizard life could be. But the films skipped it. No flying gnomes, no biting fingers, no Ron running in circles with a squealing gremlin on his hand. The scene would have shown Hogwarts wasn't the only place full of magic. Even a backyard chore could become a spellbound comedy act. Number 14, Lockhart's Valentine's Day chaos. Gilderoy Lockhart lived for attention, so when Valentine's Day arrived, he saw it as his moment to shine. In the Chamber of Secrets, he transformed Hogwarts into a pink nightmare. Glittering hearts floated through the air. Silk ribbons hung from the walls. Dwarves dressed as cupids marched down the corridors. Yes, dwarves, with wings and harps, singing. The chaos reached its peak when one of these grumpy little cupids ambushed Harry, right in the middle of the hallway. The dwarf tackled him, knocked over his bag and sat on his ankles. Then in front of a crowd he began to sing, loudly. His eyes are as green as a fresh pickled toad, his hair is as dark as a blackboard. Harry froze. People stared. Draco Malfoy was howling with laughter. Ginny Weasley, who wrote the poem, nearly died of shame. And Lockhart, he just clapped, beaming like it was the greatest show on earth. The whole thing was a beautiful mess, pure Hogwarts comedy, but the films left it out. No dwarf, no poem, no Harry slowly melting into the floor. Just silence, a perfect scene, gone. It was everything we loved about the books, awkward, magical, and absolutely ridiculous. Number 15. Fred and George experiment on first years. Fred and George Weasley were never content with simply being the class clowns at Hogwarts. No, for them, mischief was a serious craft, an art form carefully honed through years of practice, observation, and, perhaps most importantly, experimentation. What the films only hinted at, the books revealed in mischievous detail. The twins didn't just create magical products, they tested them, often on the most unsuspecting targets of all, the first years. Their laboratory, the Hogwarts corridors, their guinea pigs. Curious, wide-eyed 11-year-olds who didn't know better than to accept a strange sweet from a laughing redhead. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, J.K. Rowling peels back the curtain on the true scale of Fred and George's unregulated magical experimentation. During Harry's 5th year, Hogwarts was under the iron rule of Dolores Umbridge, and morale among students had plummeted. But in the chaos, the Weasley twins saw opportunity. "Give us a couple of kids who don't mind bleeding noses, and we'll have this place in stitches by dinner," Fred had said, his eyes glinting with excitement. It was the perfect time to launch their line of skiving snack boxes, a set of magical candies designed to simulate illness and allow students to skip class. What made the skiving snack boxes so memorable was the sheer audacity of their effects. Nosebleed nougat would cause an immediate and dramatic nosebleed. Puking pastille? Instant vomiting, fever, fudge raised body temperatures to worrying levels. The genius of these treats was in their reversibility. One end made you ill and the other restored you. George once quipped, "All the benefits of being sick, none of the hospital wing." Naturally, first years, unfamiliar with Hogwarts social dynamics, were easily convinced to take part in the trials. One such unfortunate volunteer was a Hufflepuff first year named Kevin Whitby. He'd barely made it through his first charms lesson when George approached him with a cheerful smile and an enticing box. "Free sample," George said. "It'll make you miss herbology." Kevin, not yet wary of the twins' reputation, popped the sweet into his mouth. Seconds later, he was doubled over, vomiting uncontrollably. Fred and George stood nearby, furiously scribbling notes. "Need to reduce reaction time," Fred muttered. "That's a bit too immediate." Kevin, meanwhile, was escorted to Madame Pomfrey, who soon banned the twins from entering the hospital wing altogether. Ron, of course, was in awe. To him, his brothers were geniuses, visionaries even. He often defended them against Hermione's moral crusades. "You have to admit it's brilliant," he told her once after witnessing a second-year projectile bath onto an unsuspecting suit of armor. Hermione, however, was horrified. "They're using children as test subjects, Ron," she snapped. "That's not brilliant. It's reckless and dangerous." But the twins didn't see it that way. For them, it was simply part of the process. "Every great inventor needs to test their products," George had argued one day in the Gryffindor common room. "You think Zonko started out by accident?" Fred added. "We're just refining the craft." Hermione tried reasoning with them, but their cheerful deflections were infuriating. "We'll let you test the canary creams next time," Fred said sweetly. "Might give you a nice set of feathers, brighten up your day." She responded by confiscating 2 boxes and threatening to report them to Professor McGonagall. It didn't work. The very next day, Fred slipped a nosebleed nougat into a first year's pumpkin juice just to test its solubility in liquids. One of the most hilarious incidents involved a particularly gullible Ravenclaw named Nigel Blenkinsop. The twins convinced him that their new fever fudge could help him avoid a particularly nasty potions exam. "You'll be up to 102 degrees in 30 seconds, Fred promised. "Enough to fool Snape's wand diagnostics." Nigel ate the entire piece, not realizing the dosage hadn't yet been properly calculated. His fever spiked so quickly that he collapsed in the corridor outside the dungeons, moaning deliriously about flobberworms in his socks. Even Peeves paused to stare. "Not bad," George said, raising an eyebrow. "Needs toning down a bit." These stories might sound cruel to the uninitiated, but the first years were often willing participants, drawn in by the Weasleys' charm and the promise of skipping class. Some even came back asking for more. "Can I try the vomit variant next time?" a young Gryffindor asked hopefully, the remains of a bloody tissue clutched in his hand. The twins exchanged proud smiles. Their fan base was growing. And yet, despite their antics, Fred and George maintained an odd kind of honor. They never tricked someone without some kind of disclosure. Their rule was simple. You take it, it's on you. It wasn't exactly informed consent, but it was something. When Hermione accused them of coercion, Fred responded with mock seriousness. "Madam Granger, we operate only on the strictest ethical standards. We asked the kid if he wanted to vomit. He said yes." The comedic highlight came during a rainy Tuesday in November. The twins had just finished tweaking their nosebleed nougats for increased blood viscosity. "Looks more dramatic this way," George explained. They handed it to a Slytherin first year who skeptically bit down. The effect was instant and dramatic. Blood gushed from his nose like a faucet. Screaming, he ran through the hallway, slipping in his own trail of gore. Fred sprinted after him with a handful of the antidote, laughing uncontrollably. "Take the purple end, purple!" Professor McGonagall was less amused. "If I see one more child hemorrhaging in my corridor, Weasley, I'll have you skinned and fed to the Whomping Willow," she barked. Fred bowed deeply. "As you wish, Professor. Would you like a complimentary sample of our new anti-headache lozenges, tested only once?" Mild screaming. Through it all, the twins' prankster empire thrived. Their room in Gryffindor Tower had become a veritable workshop of bubbling cauldrons, parchment scrolls, and half-eaten experiments. Even Lee Jordan got in on the action, volunteering to test a new temporary unconsciousness gum. "It's for exams," Fred explained. "Fall asleep just as the paper starts, wake up as it ends, no stress." Lee passed out cold for 7 hours. "Still needs work," George admitted. Number 16, Snape in Neville's grandmother's clothes. It was one of those scenes that, once read, etches itself permanently into the imagination, vivid, absurd, hilarious. A moment so precisely conjured by J.K. Rowling's prose that readers across the globe collectively howled with laughter. And yet, when the cinematic adaptation of The Prisoner of Azkaban finally graced the silver screen, this scene was trimmed, diluted, reduced to a visual footnote that never quite captured the spirit of the original. We are, of course, speaking about the day Professor Remus Lupin introduced his third-year Defense Against the Dark Arts students to the Boggart and the unforgettable transformation of Severus Snape into Neville Longbottom's grandmother. It all began in the cluttered staff room at Hogwarts, a place rarely used by students, filled with overstuffed armchairs and the lingering scent of old tobacco and leather. On that day, Professor Lupin, warm-eyed and mild-mannered despite the werewolf inside him, welcomed a classroom full of curious Gryffindors into that seldom-seen space. Among them stood Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, Hermione Granger, and perhaps most nervously of all, Neville Longbottom. The lesson promised something both exciting and mysterious, an encounter with a Boggart, a shapeshifter, that took the form of one's worst fear. Neville, round-faced and perpetually anxious, had never been known for his confidence. Raised by his formidable grandmother, Augusta Longbottom, he lived under the shadow of expectations and lingering tragedy. His magical potential was often buried beneath a blanket of insecurity, and more than once he had been the object of ridicule. But that day Lupin did something extraordinary. He made Neville the first volunteer. The entire room turned to look at the boy, whose eyes grew wide as saucers. "Come on, Neville," Lupin said kindly. "The thing that scares you most of all is Professor Snape." The boy nodded furiously, his lips trembling. Laughter rippled through the class, but Lupin wasn't mocking. He was already strategizing, gently nudging Neville toward empowerment. "Can you picture him in something funny?" Lupin asked. Neville hesitated for a moment, then stammered, My grandmother's clothes." The idea took root like wildfire. As Lupin moved aside and opened the wardrobe, the Boggart leapt forth in a whirl of smoke and shadows. With a sharp crack, it twisted into the looming shape of Severus Snape, sneering and black-robed, eyes glittering with disdain. The room gasped. Neville staggered back. But then, with Lupin's encouragement, Neville lifted his wand. "Ridiculous!" he cried. The effect was immediate. Snape's robes swirled and changed. The entire class watched, stunned, as the figure of their feared potions master suddenly stood before them in a long, emerald-green dress of brocade with a moth-eaten fox fur scarf draped around the shoulders. On his head, perched absurdly, was a towering, stuffed vulture hat, unmistakably Augusta Longbottom's trademark. And in one gloved hand, the now feminine Snape clutched a big red handbag. Snape was standing there in front of them all, in the clothes of Neville's grandmother, Rowling wrote, with a masterful touch of comedic timing. There was a moment of silence, then everybody burst out laughing. It wasn't just laughter, it was catharsis. The stern and terrifying Snape, who had belittled, insulted, and bullied Neville for years, now stood ridiculed in front of the entire class. The transformation was more than visual comedy. It was a symbolic reversal of power. For once, Neville Longbottom was not the joke. He was the one who had turned fear into absurdity, pain into hilarity. Even Ron Weasley was on the floor, doubled over with laughter, and Harry's eyes were watering. But it was Neville who stood tallest, his face flushed, not with embarrassment but pride. This detail, as he with the grandmother's clothes, was tragically lost in translation when Alfonso Cuarón directed the third film. Yes, we see Snape in a woman's outfit, but the specificity is gone. The stuffed vulture hat, the red handbag, the old-fashioned green dress, all replaced with a generic ensemble that lacks the emotional punch and the personal symbolism. In the book, the clothing choice wasn't random. It was Neville's own internal armor, drawn from the matriarch who had raised him, scolded him, and, in her own rigid way, made him strong. Augusta Longbottom was not a figure of ridicule, far from it. She was proud, austere, and fiercely devoted to her family. Her attire, often mocked by others, was a badge of resilience. When Neville imagined Snape in that outfit, he wasn't just being funny. He was reclaiming his power through association with the strongest figure in his life. The vulture hat was no longer absurd. It was protective. The handbag, a symbol of authority. The fox fur. A grandmother's embrace turned into armor. Lupin, ever perceptive, understood this nuance. By giving Neville the stage, he wasn't merely teaching the ridiculous charm. He was teaching self-worth. "Wonderful, Neville," he said gently as the Boggart recoiled and twisted into the next fear. In that single moment, Lupin became one of the few adults at Hogwarts who saw beyond Neville's stumbles, who recognized the boy's courage simmering beneath the surface. The scene continued with other students facing their fears. A severed hand for Seamus Finnegan, a giant spider for Ron, a banshee for Parvati Patil. Each one took a turn, but the energy of the class had shifted. They weren't just practicing spells, they were confronting nightmares and laughing in their faces. As for Snape, the impact of that transformation lingered long after the class ended. Though he was not present during the Boggart lesson, it's not hard to imagine how he might have responded if he had been told. The mere idea of being dressed in Augusta Longbottom's hat and handbag, the horror, the indignity. Yet it's equally easy to imagine him discovering the incident, then punishing Neville with extra homework or a particularly venomous comment during potions. But that day remained, at its heart, Neville's triumph. For once, he wasn't the frightened boy who melted cauldrons or forgot passwords. He had faced his terror, a teacher who constantly humiliated him and reduced him to comic absurdity. This was a moment that changed him, subtly but permanently. Number 17, Harry's first meeting with Luna. When Harry first saw Luna Lovegood, he wasn't quite sure whether he had entered a dream or stepped into someone else's reality. The compartment door of the Hogwarts Express slid open, and there she sat, a pale girl with straggly blonde hair, large, silvery eyes, and a faraway look that made her appear not quite present. Her wand was behind her left ear, as if it were a pencil, and she was reading The Quibbler upside down, holding it with both hands like it was the most normal thing in the world. Neville Longbottom had just asked if he could sit with Harry, Ginny and Hermione, but there wasn't space in their compartment. Ginny, in her usual generous way, suggested they go find room elsewhere. That's how they ended up in the company of Luna Lovegood, the girl Ginny introduced simply as Loony Lovegood. Ginny hadn't meant it unkindly. That nickname, though cruel in some mouths, carried in hers a tone of affectionate exasperation. Still, the name hung in the air for a moment, as though waiting for someone to dispute it. Luna didn't notice. Or perhaps she did, and simply chose not to care. "She's all right, Luna," Ginny whispered as they sat down. "Just a bit." "Well, you'll see." Harry did see. Almost immediately. As Luna turned the page of her upside-down magazine, her earrings, which looked suspiciously like radishes, swung with the motion. She blinked slowly, then looked directly at Harry, her wide eyes unblinking. There was something profoundly disarming in the way she stared. Not rude, not shy, just entirely sincere. Luna Lovegood looked at people the way others might look at clouds, with idle curiosity and no expectation they'd stay the same shape. "You're Harry Potter?" she said dreamily. Harry, caught mid-thought, nodded. "Yeah, I am." "I thought so," she said, then returned to her magazine, completely uninterested in elaborating. Neville, meanwhile, was crawling on all fours, peering under the seats. Trevor's disappeared again. He muttered. His toad had a long-standing habit of vanishing at the worst possible moments. Ginny knelt beside him to help, offering soothing words as she reached beneath Luna's seat. Harry found himself watching Luna, not sure whether to be amused or concerned. She had now begun humming a tune to herself. Possibly the Hogwarts school song, but the notes were loose, improvised. Harry's glance flicked to the cover of The Quibbler, which had a picture of Cornelius Fudge in a ballerina's tutu dancing with a goblin. The headline screamed, "Fudge is a goblin-controlled puppet." Before Harry could decide what to say, Luna broke the silence again, in her soft, cloudy voice. "You're not mad, you know," she said, fixing him with that same unblinking gaze. Harry blinked. "Sorry?" "You're not mad," she repeated. "I can see them too." It took him a moment to realize what she meant. They had just passed a window, and beyond it, grazing in the distance like skeletal horses, were the thestrals, the winged, reptilian creatures that had pulled the carriages up to the castle. Most students couldn't see them. Harry, who had seen Cedric Diggory die the previous year, had been shocked to find them visible. He'd thought he was losing his mind, but here was Luna, saying she saw them too, and saying it like she was offering him a blanket in the rain. "You mean the horses?" "Yes," she said serenely. "They're called thestrals. They're quite gentle, really, but people avoid them because they're associated with death." She tilted her head. "You've seen someone die." Harry felt the chill run up his spine, not because of what she said, but because she was right. No one else had understood what he meant when he tried to explain. No one else had believed him, but Luna did, instantly and completely, without so much as blinking. He cleared his throat. "Who did you see die?" "My mother," said Luna, in the same calm voice. "She was experimenting with spells and one went wrong. It was quite horrible. I was 9. Harry didn't know what to say. He had expected tears, awkwardness, anything but that serene tone. Luna didn't appear sad, but she also didn't seem detached. She just was. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "It's all right," she said, and smiled at him. The kind of smile that belongs to someone who has accepted the unbearable and carried on anyway. That was the moment Harry began to understand her. The entire train ride was a kind of strange play, where the normal expectations of conversation didn't apply. Luna's presence transformed the compartment. She spoke occasionally, always with the same odd clarity, and often about things no one else believed existed: Raxperts, Nargles, and the Rotfang conspiracy. Ginny chuckled, Neville frowned in confusion, and Harry just listened. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it, with unwavering belief. Luna Lovegood didn't need you to believe her. She believed herself enough for both of you. When the train began to slow near Hogsmeade Station, Neville gave up his search for Trevor, and Ginny helped him stand. Luna tucked the quibbler away in a beaded homemade bag that looked like it might have once been a sock. Harry, watching her, realized that for the first time in weeks he didn't feel like the world was pressing down on his shoulders. Her presence, strange as it was, had lightened something inside him. The moment was brief. Outside, rain fell in thick curtains and students stepped from the train into the mist. Hagrid's booming voice called the first years, and the rest made their way to the carriages. As Harry climbed into one, he turned to Luna. "They pull themselves, don't they?" he asked, referring to the thestrals. "Yes," she said, already climbing into the next carriage. "It's all real, you know." The door closed, and she was gone. This entire scene, delicate, comic, and eerie all at once, was largely omitted from the film adaptation. Luna's introduction in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix movie is touching in its own right, but it misses the brilliant strangeness of her first appearance in the book. There's no upside-down quibbler, no missing toad, no radish earrings, no softly whispered confession of shared grief. The charm and absurdity that made the scene unforgettable were streamlined out in favor of visual simplicity. Number 18, Ron's manly gift for Hermione. Of all the awkward moments scattered like glitter across Ron Weasley's teenage years, one stands out as both hilarious and telling. A simple Christmas gift given with the best of intentions that turned into a comedy of adolescent blunders. It happened during the chaotic events of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, when the Triwizard Tournament loomed over Hogwarts, and emotions among its students ran wild. In the midst of it all, young Ronald Bilius Weasley decided to give Hermione Granger a Christmas present. What he chose was peculiar. A bottle of cologne called Eau de Cologne, Essence of Muggle Courage. There was something absurdly beautiful about the moment. Ron, with his gangly limbs and signature lack of social finesse, stood there, clearly expecting appreciation. Hermione, the cleverest witch of her age, stared at the gift as though she were examining a blast-ended scroot under a microscope. And Harry, our ever-watchful narrator, had to practically bite his lip to keep from laughing. Hermione took the tiny bottle from him and turned it over in her hands, squinting at the label. "Essence of Muggle Courage," she read aloud, raising an eyebrow. Thank you, Ron." It was the kind of exchange that told volumes about the growing tension between the two. The humour in this gift doesn't just come from its awkwardness, it comes from the symbolic irony of it all. At this point in the series, Ron's feelings for Hermione were bubbling just beneath the surface, tangled up in jealousy, pride, and the classic teenage confusion that makes boys say stupid things and buy even stupider gifts. He wasn't ready to admit that he liked her, not even to himself, so instead he channeled his uncertainty into a completely tone-deaf attempt at generosity. What made this moment so priceless, so uniquely Ron, is how much it revealed about his internal chaos. He wasn't trying to be insulting, he wasn't even trying to be funny. He was, in his own clumsy way, trying to impress Hermione. But rather than giving her something thoughtful or elegant, he latched onto something vaguely manly, vaguely Muggle, and completely inappropriate. It was as if Ron thought, what would a bloke buy a girl to seem brave, and landed on a scented potion with all the subtlety of a troll in a tea shop. The name of the cologne, Essence of Muggle Courage, is in itself a masterstroke of accidental comedy. What does that even mean? Muggle courage? Was it meant to invoke visions of firemen or boxers or perhaps blokes who cross London traffic without checking both ways? The phrase is so wonderfully meaningless that it loops back around to being charming. Ron, bless him, thought he was giving her something cool, something exotic, maybe even something that hinted at her heritage, since Hermione is Muggle-born. But instead it was like giving a vegan a gift card to a steakhouse. Hermione, for her part, handled the situation with grace. She didn't laugh, though she might have wanted to. She didn't scold him either, though Ron surely deserved it. She simply raised an eyebrow and accepted it, no doubt mentally filing it away, as yet another moment in the curious courtship of Ronald Weasley. And of course, this wasn't the first time Ron had let his awkwardness shine. Nor would it be the last. What makes the scene even better is its total absence from the film adaptation. The Harry Potter movies, for all their charm, often stripped away the smaller, richer character moments in favour of sweeping drama. But it's these little scenes, these hilarious, cringe-inducing flashes of reality, that make the book so beloved. The films gave us epic battles and emotional showdowns, but they robbed us of Ron's Christmas catastrophe, and that's a real shame. This moment is also a perfect example of the show, don't tell principle in storytelling. Rowling never needed to spell out that Ron was developing feelings for Hermione. She didn't need dramatic declarations or romantic speeches. Instead, she gave us a 14-year-old boy buying cologne for a girl who liked books and cats and elf rights. It was so wrong, it was right. The embarrassment, the confusion, it all sang with truth. That's teenage love in a nutshell. Ron was always trying to prove himself, to his brothers, to Harry, to Hermione. This gift was just another small, misguided attempt at showing he was brave, mature, and thoughtful. Of course, it backfired spectacularly, as so many of his attempts did. But the fact that he tried, that he cared, is what makes it endearing. He didn't bring her perfume with rose petals or a nice quill or a charm bracelet. No, he brought a bottle of man scent labelled like a Muggle Army recruitment poster. There's also the unspoken comedy of the cologne's actual smell. Rowling doesn't describe it in the book, but you can imagine it. Something musky and overwhelming with hints of leather, gasoline, and maybe a touch of motor oil. The kind of thing a wizard might think Muggles wear before riding off into battle. It's hilarious to picture Hermione walking around the common room reeking of courage, with other students giving her wide berth. Even better, imagine Ron in the shop, picking out this gift. One can almost hear his thought process. Perfume? No, that's too girly. Jewelry? Can't afford that. Book? Nah, she already has too many. Wait, what's this? Essence of Muggle courage. That sounds impressive. I'll take it. The poor boy probably thought he'd stumbled onto something truly special. And in a way he had, just not in the way he imagined. This incident also speaks to the deeper emotional dynamic between Ron and Hermione. Their relationship was always built on a foundation of bickering, sarcasm, and mutual affection buried beneath layers of misunderstanding. Ron's gift wasn't just a bad choice, it was a window into how little he actually understood Hermione at the time, but also how much he wanted to connect with her, even if he had no idea how. One of the reasons this moment remains so iconic among book fans is because it feels so real. Everyone has either given or received a gift like that, a well-meaning but wildly off-target present that makes you cringe and smile at the same time. It's part of growing up. Ron wasn't trying to make Hermione laugh, but the fact that he did, unintentionally, made their connection even stronger in the long run. Later, as Ron matured, he would grow more attuned to Hermione's world. He'd learn to speak her language, both intellectually and emotionally. But this early misfire is what makes the journey meaningful. Without these moments, the eventual romance wouldn't feel earned. They had to stumble before they could find their rhythm, and stumble he did, spectacularly. The awkward gift also functions as a cultural joke. Ron, a pure-blood wizard raised in the magical world, was giving Hermione, who grew up in the Muggle world, an item that was supposed to appeal to Muggle sensibilities, but clearly didn't. It was like someone giving a French woman a bottle of American-style elegance. The cultural gap only made it funnier. Ron was trying to be thoughtful, but ended up unintentionally patronizing her, and Hermione, to her credit, didn't throw the bottle at his head. Harry's reaction in the moment is also worth noting. Harry looked away quickly to hide a grin. That one line tells us everything. Harry, the ever-loyal friend, didn't laugh out loud, but he definitely saw the humor. He was old enough and wise enough to know what was happening. Ron was falling, awkwardly and obliviously for their mutual friend. And Hermione knew it too. The only one who didn't seem to realize it was Ron himself. These are the kinds of moments that fill in the emotional gaps between the big events. Voldemort rising from a cauldron, dragons and Yule balls and tri-wizard mazes, they're all important. But it's the little human stumbles that stick with us. Ron's Cologne catastrophe is burned into readers' memories, not because it changed the plot, but because it told the truth. The truth is this. Ron loved Hermione long before he understood what that meant. He admired her, needed her, wanted her approval, but he didn't know how to say it. So he gave her a bottle of essence of Muggle courage. And in doing so, he spoke louder than words ever could. The magic of this moment lies in its quiet absurdity. It doesn't involve spells or curses. It doesn't move the story forward. It just exists like a snapshot of adolescence preserved in amber. And in that snapshot we see the boy Ron was, the man he would become, and the girl who would someday love him in return. In the end, Ron's gift was not a failure, not really. It was a message, awkward and muddled, but sincere. Hermione may have raised an eyebrow, but she kept the gift. She didn't mock him. She didn't return it. She understood even then that beneath the goofy label and mismatched scent was a boy who was trying his best. And that, perhaps, is the greatest magic of all. Number 19. Colin Creevey's magical photo fail. Of all the characters who flutter in and out of Harry Potter's life at Hogwarts, few are as eager, devoted, and unintentionally hilarious as Colin Creevey. Introduced in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Colin arrives like a firework, bright, loud, and impossible to ignore. A Muggle-born first year with a heart full of hero worship and a camera always at the ready, Colin instantly attaches himself to the boy who lived with a level of enthusiasm that borders on the absurd. "All right, Harry, I'm Colin Creevey. I'm in Gryffindor too," he blurts out in their first encounter. "I've been wanting to meet you ever since I heard about you in the train. I'm in the same year as you, only in a different house. My dad's a milkman. He couldn't believe it when I told him." His words come out in a single breath, and in that moment the image of Colin as an excitable puppy chasing after its idol is forever cemented in readers' minds. What makes Colin's obsession with Harry so oddly endearing is his complete and utter lack of guile. He isn't trying to ride Harry's fame for personal gain. He isn't hoping to become famous by association. Colin simply adores Harry. To him, Harry isn't just a schoolmate or a celebrity, he's a living legend, and Colin is determined to capture every single second of his life on film. With his Muggle camera dangling from his neck like a treasured artifact, Colin spends his first year at Hogwarts tailing Harry with relentless energy, always begging, "Just one more photo, Harry, please." It is in Chamber of Secrets that Colin's antics reach their most memorable heights. He's seen snapping pictures of Harry mid-bite during meals, interrupting him in the hallways, and once even managing to click the shutter at a moment when Harry was simply standing. The humour of these moments lies not only in their frequency but also in Harry's growing discomfort. Colin, in his wide-eyed innocence, doesn't notice, or perhaps doesn't care, that Harry would rather not be photographed while chewing toast. One particularly amusing passage illustrates this perfectly. He was taking photographs of everyone, much to their annoyance. He kept running up to Harry and asking him to hold still while he clicked away. This boy, barely tall enough to peek over the banister, had made it his personal mission to turn Harry into a poster star. And his weapon of choice was a camera that didn't even belong in the magical world. Colin had brought a Muggle camera to a wizarding school, and with each snap of the flash, he chipped away at the boundaries between the two worlds. The most heartfelt and simultaneously ridiculous moment came when Colin tried to develop a photo of Harry to hang on his dormitory wall. The image he hoped to create was not just a picture but a tribute, a shrine. He imagined a smiling, moving Harry waving back at him from his bedside. Instead, all he got was a still, lifeless print. "But it doesn't move," he reportedly wailed to anyone who would listen. "It just stays there." His heartbreak over the failure of his plan was comic gold. Here was a boy who wanted to idolize his hero in true wizarding fashion, but his technology had betrayed him. What makes this moment resonate so deeply is its relatability. Anyone who has ever idolized someone, be it a pop star, a sports hero, or a fictional character, has fantasized about putting up posters and living within reach of that magic. Colin tried to do just that, and the crushing disappointment of realizing his photo was just ink on paper, not enchanted, not alive, was both tragic and hilarious. The earnestness with which he pursued his goal only made his failure more poignant. There's a childlike purity to Colin's efforts that reminds us of the wonder we all felt upon first discovering the world of Harry Potter. In a place where portraits talk, staircases move and ghosts walk through walls, Colin's reliance on a Muggle camera becomes a symbol of the gap between worlds. and the bridge he's desperately trying to build. He is, in many ways, a metaphor for the reader, someone from the outside, enchanted by magic, doing whatever he can to make it a part of his reality. Colin's desire to turn Harry into a poster boy wasn't limited to just one attempt. According to multiple mentions in the book, he often expressed dreams of creating an entire photo album dedicated to Harry's heroic moments. "I've got a photo of you playing Quidditch, Harry, and one where you're walking with Hermione, and one where you're eating pudding. Want to see?" It's as though Colin was assembling a private museum, his own personal gallery of the chosen one, where every moment, no matter how mundane, was worthy of immortalization. Harry, for his part, handled Colin with an awkward patience that gradually frayed at the edges. At first, he merely nodded and smiled, too polite to push the younger boy away. But as Colin's persistence escalated, Harry began to dread his presence. The worst of it was that Colin Creevey kept turning up wherever he went, Rowling writes with dry wit. He seemed to have memorized Harry's schedule. The idea of Colin hiding behind suits of armor or sprinting down hallways just to snap a candid photo is almost cartoonish in its absurdity, but therein lies the charm. One of the lesser-known facts is that Rowling based Colin's behavior on real-life superfans who often chase celebrities with the same mix of awe and cluelessness. In interviews, she hinted that she wanted to explore the idea of fame as something burdensome, especially for someone like Harry, who never sought the spotlight. Colin, in this context, becomes both a comedic figure and a subtle commentary on the pressures of being adored. Even more ironic is the fact that Colin's camera never once captured the kind of images he truly longed for. In the world of magic, photographs are alive. They shift, smile, dance. But Colin's muggle camera, no matter how often he waved it or how fervently he clicked, only produced stills. He was, in effect, trying to capture a magical life through non-magical means. This doomed endeavor only added to the comic tragedy of his mission. "I wanted to get a picture of you on your broom, Harry," he said, "but it came out all blurry." But Colin's quest wasn't merely about pictures, it was about validation. As a Muggle-born, Colin was already navigating a world he didn't fully understand. To anchor himself, he chose a figure he could admire, someone who made the impossible seem achievable. By photographing Harry, he was documenting not just the boy who lived, but his own journey, his way of saying, "I'm part of this world too." In later books, Colin fades into the background, but his legacy lingers. We remember him for his overexposure, his flashbulbs, his awkward timing. Yet when we learn in Deathly Hallows that he fought and died in the Battle of Hogwarts, the laughter catches in our throats. The boy who once annoyed everyone with his devotion had grown into someone willing to die for the cause. It's a quiet, devastating reminder that even comic relief characters have hearts, and Colin's beat for the very world he once tried to photograph into eternity. In retrospect, Colin's attempts to make Harry a poster star weren't far off the mark. Harry did become the face of a movement, a symbol of resistance, a name whispered with hope and fear. But he never chose that life. Colin chose it for him, naively, but with love. He saw the legend before the world did. He captured it before it had even happened. The tragedy of the non-moving photo is more than a punchline. It's a symbol of unrealized dreams. It represents the limitations of Muggle tools in a magical world, and more profoundly, the human desire to hold on to something as fleeting as a moment. Colin wanted a piece of Harry he could keep forever. What he got was a reminder that magic doesn't always bend to our will, no matter how much we believe. But Colin's story isn't just about cameras and disappointment, it's about the purity of admiration, the innocence of youth, and the blind loyalty that drives people to do silly, wonderful things. It's about how the most minor of characters can leave the deepest impressions. And in a series filled with wands, spells, and dragons, it is the image of a boy, holding a camera too big for his hands, chasing his hero down a hallway that stays with us the longest. Colin never got his magical moving poster, but in the hearts of readers he succeeded in capturing something far more lasting. His devotion, awkward as it was, embodied the very spirit of Hogwarts, of discovering something greater than yourself and reaching for it, camera in hand, ready to believe. Number 20, Ron grows tentacles on his face. Of all the chaotic, hilarious, and unforgettable moments in the world of Harry Potter, there's one that readers vividly remember. One that never made it to the silver screen, but lingers in the minds of fans for its pure, whimsical madness. It involves our beloved Ronald Weasley, a wrongly brewed potion, and a rather unfortunate case of sudden tentacle growth. Tucked within the pages of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, this moment captures not only the unpredictable nature of magic, but also the charm of classroom misadventures at Hogwarts. The scene unfolds in Horace Slughorn's potions class, where sixth-year students gather around cauldrons, each attempting to brew a complex potion under the gaze of their eccentric new professor. It's an ordinary lesson, or at least it starts out that way. The assignment? A confusing concoction meant to befuddle and disorient its drinker. A rather delicate recipe requiring precise timing, careful measurements, and crucially, the correct sequence of ingredients. For some, like Hermione Granger, this is an exciting challenge. For others, namely Ron, it's a ticking time bomb. "Blimey, this stuff stinks," Ron mutters, squinting at the half-mixed liquid bubbling ominously in his cauldron. He's already forgotten whether he added valerian root before the sneeze-wort. A fatal misstep, as Hermione had warned, no less than 5 times. But Ron, with his typical confidence and a dash of recklessness, waves his wand over the mixture and adds a dash of something that definitely isn't supposed to go in yet. A puff of green smoke hisses upward. Hermione, from the other side of the table, catches the scent and immediately looks alarmed. "Ron, wait! That's not—" Too late. With a noise that can only be described as a magical splort, the potion explodes. Not in a violent, dangerous way, but in a loud, wet, thoroughly embarrassing one. A wave of purple sludge bursts from the cauldron and splashes directly into Ron's face, covering his freckles with a glittering, sticky film. At first he's stunned. The whole class freezes. Even Slughorn, mid-sentence, halts and stares. And then, before their very eyes, it begins. Sprouting from Ron's forehead is a small, fleshy protrusion. Within seconds, it stretches into a full-length, slimy tentacle, glistening under the torchlight. Another follows it from the side of his neck. A third coils out just above his left ear. The classroom erupts, some with horror, others with howls of laughter. Harry, torn between concern and amusement, blinks at his best friend. Ron, you've got something on your head." "I what?" Ron cries, trying to peer upwards, but a fourth tentacle flops down into his eye, making him yelp. "It's like a blooming octopus attacked him," Dean Thomas shouts, laughing so hard he nearly falls off his stool. Even Slughorn, ever the composed professor, covers his mouth with his hand, his moustache twitching as he fights not to laugh. "Oh dear," he says, chuckling. "Oh dear, indeed. Mr. Weasley, I dare say that's not quite what we were going for." "Do something," Ron yells, trying to bat the tentacles away, but they writhe and wiggle on their own accord, slapping against his cheeks and curling toward his robes. "They've got suckers! Harry, they've got suckers!" Neville Longbottom has already ducked under the table in panic, convinced the tentacles might jump ship and attack him next. Hermione, however, is remarkably calm. She reaches for her notes and begins scanning the antidote section. "You added the porcupine quills before taking it off the heat, didn't you?" she says without looking up. How is that important right now? Ron screeches. Because, she says, flipping another page, that's what triggers the tentacular reaction in this particular brew. I read it in Advanced Potion Making, page 264. Of course she did. Slughorn walks over, peering at the unfortunate victim with the kind of mild academic interest usually reserved for rare plants or mythical creatures. Fascinating. I haven't seen tentacle growth since Cassius Warrington tried to turn a shrinking solution into a hair tonic. It was effective, just not in the way he'd hoped. Professor, Ron groans, can we talk less about Warrington and more about getting these things off me? Right you are, my boy, right you are. Slughorn draws his wand and with a gentle flick mutters, Finite incantatum. Nothing happens. He muses. They may be too, magically embedded at the moment. Give it a few hours. They should wilt on their own. Wilt? Ron wails. You mean I have to go around with these until they wilt? By now, the entire class is doubled over in laughter. Even Malfoy, who would usually seize any opportunity to mock Ron, is too shocked to come up with a proper insult. He just stares open-mouthed before finally managing, Tentacle Head Weasley. Nice. For Harry, it's one of those moments that perfectly encapsulates what it means to attend Hogwarts, a place where danger and absurdity walk hand in hand, where you might survive a deadly duel one day, only to sprout cephalopod limbs the next because of a botched potion. And it's these moments, wild, silly, and profoundly magical, that make the experience so unforgettable. As the class wraps up, Ron slinks out of the room with his collar pulled high, trying to hide the curling appendages. Don't laugh, he warns Harry, who is desperately trying to keep a straight face. This is serious. I look like a squid with freckles. I'm not laughing, Harry says, voice strained. I'm just admiring your, new look. It's like something Hagrid would adopt as a pet, Ginny says when she spots him in the hallway. Come on, Ron, give us a wave, or 10. In the common room that evening, the legend of Tentacle Ron spreads like wildfire. Someone draws a cartoon of him wrestling a giant jellyfish on the notice board. Fred and George, upon hearing the tale via Owl, send a howler that opens with, Dear Octo-Ron, and ends with an offer to make him the face of their new skiving snack box line. Why just fake a nosebleed when you can sprout tentacles instead? Eventually the tentacles do disappear, and with a faint pop and the smell of seaweed, and Ron is left with nothing but a lingering trauma and the knowledge that he will never live this down. Even years later, in the quiet of the burrow or the chaos of the ministry, the story returns. Remember when you had squid arms, someone would say, and Ron would groan, Not again! But deep down, even Ron had to admit it was kind of funny. Not at the time, of course, but in hindsight, it was one of those utterly ridiculous things that made Hogwarts. I still say the potion was cursed, he grumbles a week later. That or someone sabotaged it, probably Malfoy. Hermione rolls her eyes. Or maybe she says you should just read the instructions next time. I did, Ron protests. Sort of. You poured porcupine quills into the wrong cauldron, she replies flatly. I panicked. The story of Ron and the tentacles remains one of those little treasures buried within the books. A scene so visually absurd, so rich in magical mischief, it's surprising it never made it into the films. It's a perfect encapsulation of J.K. Rowling's knack for combining humour and the unpredictable nature of magic. And in the end, it's a reminder that magic, like adolescence, is messy, unpredictable, and often utterly hilarious. It doesn't always result in glory. Sometimes it gives you octopus limbs, and sometimes that's just part of the journey. If anything, the scene proves once and for all, never underestimate Ron Weasley. Not because of his magical skill, but because of his sheer ability to survive the strangest, stickiest, and squishiest moments Hogwarts has to offer. Number 21. Moaning Myrtle flirts with Harry in the bath. It was in the humid mist of the Hogwarts prefect's bathroom, marble-lined and echoing, that one of the most awkward and strangely amusing moments of Harry Potter's life unfolded. He hadn't expected company. Certainly not the ghost of a moaning girl who had, in her own peculiar way, developed a soft spot for him. Moaning Myrtle, or as she preferred, simply Myrtle, had a history of haunting bathrooms and lamenting her untimely demise, but when it came to Harry Potter, she seemed to drop the ghostly gloom in favor of something flirtatious, even clingy. Myrtle first appeared in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, sobbing in the girls' bathroom where she had died decades earlier. But it was in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire that readers saw her in a more curious light. Here, in the solemn setting of the Triwizard Tournament, Myrtle emerged not as a tragic figure, but as a bizarre comedic relief, a ghost with a girlish crush, floating through hot steam, giggling over bubbles, and peeking where she clearly shouldn't have. It all began when Harry, struggling to decipher the mysterious golden egg from the first task, received a cryptic hint from Cedric Diggory. Take a bath, take the egg with you, and, mull things over in the hot water. Harry obeyed, entering the grand bathroom equipped with a swimming pool-sized tub, hundreds of knobs, and enough steam to make a sauna jealous. The moment he opened the egg underwater, the mermaid song became clear. But his triumph was quickly interrupted by a voice. "I do hope I'm not disturbing you," Myrtle cooed, appearing through the faucet mist like some gothic parody of a water nymph. "It's been so long since someone invited me to share a bath." Harry froze, clutching the egg with one hand and yanking a large bubble in front of himself with the other. What followed was a masterclass in ghostly awkwardness. Myrtle hovered over the water, eyes half-lidded, and sighed dramatically. "I came here once with Olive Hornby," she said, referencing the girl who had tormented her in life. "But she wouldn't let me join in. Said I'd make the water cold." Harry tried not to shiver. "You're not cold now, are you?" he asked nervously. Myrtle giggled. "Not for you, Harry." The moment dripped with unease. Here was a boy barely 14, naked under bubbles, watched by the ghost of a girl who died at nearly the same age, yet trapped eternally in that moment of adolescent, emotional chaos. J.K. Rowling didn't write this scene merely for laughs. It was a brilliant juxtaposition of innocence and discomfort, the kind of youthful torment that lives between giggles and embarrassment. Myrtle's behavior was a ghostly parody of schoolgirl crushes, all the more tragic for how sincere she seemed beneath the creepiness. "You're not the first one I've seen naked, you know," Myrtle said lightly, floating closer to Harry. "I often come here to... Look, at the boys who come to wash, you'd be surprised what some of them do when they think they're alone." Harry turned crimson. You spy on people?" "Well, it's not as if they can see me," she said, sounding almost wounded. "And it's so boring, being alone all the time." Here, Rowling used Myrtle's character to explore a seldom discussed idea, that ghosts might still long for the living, not just for company, but for the emotions they once felt: attraction, affection, desire. Myrtle's fascination with Harry was not predatory, but it was eerie, and that made it even more effective as a scene. A ghost in love with a boy who feels uncomfortable and flustered? It walked a fine line between humour and pathos. In the book, Harry narrates, Myrtle's large, sad eyes were watching him out of the mist, almost dreamily. There was something oddly tender in her gaze, a sorrow rooted in a life she never got to finish. Unlike the Bloody Baron or the Fat Friar, Myrtle's ghost clung to youth, to bathrooms, to tears, and yes, to boys. Her obsession with Harry was perhaps not about Harry himself, but what he represented. Attention, warmth, someone who saw her. In her death, Myrtle had been invisible to the living world except when she was breaking pipes or flooding lavatories. Harry had spoken to her, treated her like a person. That was all it took. "You know," Myrtle whispered once, floating closer, "I tried to help you because I like you. No one else talks to me like you do, not even Cedric." He just smiled politely. "But you actually listen." Harry didn't know how to respond. He mumbled something incoherent and ducked underwater again, as though the mermaid's song might protect him from Myrtle's adoration. In the films, particularly in The Goblet of Fire, the bathtub scene was adapted, and while it retained some of its comedic awkwardness, it softened Myrtle's intensity. The film version added bubbles and visual gags, but removed the more complex and uncomfortable undercurrents of Myrtle's obsession. In the book, she didn't just pop up and leave. She lingered, circled, and monologued, a ghostly Ophelia dreaming of something she could never have. There was also the darker subtext, easy to miss beneath the laughter. Myrtle had died in a bathroom. Her soul remained trapped in the very place of her last humiliation and fear. It was no wonder she found strange comfort in returning to warm water, to human contact, even if it was only through voyeurism. "I watched you for a bit before I said anything," she admitted once. "You look very sweet," blowing bubbles. It's a line that would send shivers down the spine of any teenager. And yet, Harry didn't lash out. He didn't yell or call for Dobby or McGonagall. He blushed, ducked, and endured. Perhaps he knew, but instinctively, that this ghost girl wasn't trying to hurt him. She was lonely. Myrtle's character was written with layers, not just as a comic foil, but as a metaphor. She represented every teenager who felt unseen, unloved, mocked, and left behind. Her obsession with Harry was more than just a ghost crush. It was a desperate plea to matter to someone. In another scene, when Harry asks Myrtle if she knows about the lake's inhabitants, she replies eagerly, "Oh, I've seen the mer people. They don't like me very much, but I don't care. I go underwater sometimes, just to listen." There's something profoundly sad about a ghost diving into the lake just to feel surrounded by life again, even if that life resents her presence. Harry's reaction to Myrtle, patient, awkward, respectful, despite his discomfort, reveals his character. He is a boy who has suffered, who knows what it is to be alone, and even in the face of a ghost's inappropriate affection, he offers her dignity. He never mocks her, never calls her names. That is the real heart of the scene. The humor comes not from cruelty, but from absurdity. A ghost in love with a living boy is funny, but only because it's also so tenderly written. Rowling's genius was in finding these moments, in allowing laughter to mix with sadness, letting characters like Myrtle be ridiculous and real. It's also worth noting that Harry never told anyone about the full extent of that encounter. He didn't rush off to tell Ron or Hermione about how Myrtle ogled him in the tub. He kept it private, maybe out of embarrassment, maybe out of sympathy. Years later, rereading the scene, one can't help but feel something close to fondness for Myrtle. She was annoying, yes, melodramatic, undoubtedly. But she was also loyal in her own way. She gave Harry vital clues. She showed up in his moments of solitude. She reminded readers that even the dead can long for companionship. In the end, Myrtle didn't change. She was still floating through toilets and crying over misfortunes. But for a few scenes, she was more than a running joke. She was the embodiment of adolescent yearning gone wrong. She was the spirit of teenage heartbreak, preserved forever in Hogwarts plumbing. And for Harry, for the boy who survived, who was constantly navigating dangers beyond his years, Myrtle was just one more strange trial. A test of kindness, awkwardness, and the bizarre intimacy of being wanted by someone stuck between life and death. It may have been just one scene in a bathroom, but it revealed so much. Not just about Myrtle, but about Harry. And perhaps about all of us. About how we deal with the strange, the uncomfortable, the tragic and the tender, often all at once. "People can be so mean," Myrtle had said once, eyes brimming with tears. "Just because I'm dead." But Harry wasn't mean. And for a girl who died alone in a bathroom stall, that meant more than magic ever could. Number 22, Draco Malfoy turned into a ferret. Of all the absurd and hilarious moments in the Harry Potter series, few stand out with such comic brilliance as the incident involving Draco Malfoy and a rather undignified transformation into a ferret. It happens in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, and for fans who first encountered it through the book, the scene was pure magic, a rare blend of justice, chaos, and slapstick that felt both richly deserved and side-splittingly funny. Yet when adapted for the film, this golden moment was trimmed, sanitized, and ultimately robbed of its full comic potential. What the readers got was a ferret flying through the air and tumbling once or twice. What the book gave them, however, was a full-blown magical prank at Draco's expense, loaded with detail, rhythm, and absurdity that only J.K. Rowling could deliver. It begins, predictably, with Malfoy doing what Malfoy does best, provoking. After the announcement that Durmstrang and Beauxbaton students would be staying at Hogwarts for the Triwizard Tournament, emotions ran high, and Draco's mouth, as always, ran even higher. He couldn't resist the opportunity to taunt Harry. "You'll be okay, Potter," he sneered. "I'm sure you'll get all the help you need from your scar." It was his usual brand of venomous sarcasm, sharp enough to bite, but too juvenile to ever land with real wit. What Draco lacked in originality, he compensated for with volume and smugness. And then he made the mistake of drawing his wand. Before the situation could escalate into yet another juvenile duel in the hallway, a figure emerged from the shadows. Professor Alastor Mad-Eye Moody, supposedly, appeared, his magical eye whizzing in all directions. But, as readers would later learn, it wasn't really Moody. It was Barty Crouch Jr., polyjuiced into the scarred and grizzled form of the legendary Aura. And though this imposter had dark intentions, he also had an oddly precise sense of justice when it came to punishing bullies. Moody didn't bother with a warning. He didn't draw out the discipline with a lecture. He simply pointed his wand at Draco and with a flick barked, "Ferret!" A flash of light, and in an instant the proud Slytherin heir became a white, fluffy ferret, quivering and twitching in confusion on the cold stone floor. There was no ceremony, no delay, just magic in its rawest and most hilarious form. It was so fast, so efficient, that onlookers barely had time to gasp. But the best was yet to come. "I don't like people who attack when their opponent's back's turned," said Moody coolly, scooping up the ferret by the tail. And then, to the utter disbelief of everyone watching, Ron, Harry, Hermione, the entire corridor, Moody began tossing the ferret up and down, letting it fall several feet before catching it again like a child playing with a stuffed toy. Only this toy wriggled, squeaked, and occasionally tried to twist itself into a ball of horror. The indignity of it was spectacular. "He's not supposed to do that," Hermione squeaked in alarm, but even she couldn't fully suppress the grin tugging at the corners of her mouth. Ron, meanwhile, was doubled over in laughter, unable to stand straight. Oh, that's the best thing I've ever seen," he managed between gasps. For once, Draco Malfoy's endless cruelty had earned him something more than a few house points deducted. He'd been turned into a joke, a literal bouncing ferret joke. The situation escalated when Moody, evidently enjoying himself more than he ought to have, dropped the ferret down the front of Vincent Crabbe's robes. "Let's see how you like it, Crabbe," he growled. A high-pitched squeal escaped the usually silent Crabbe, who began dancing and shaking wildly in a desperate attempt to get the creature out. The ferret, naturally terrified, began clawing its way downward, possibly trying to find an escape route from this unexpected human prison. Professor McGonagall arrived just in time to witness Crabbe shrieking and slapping his own legs, while a pale white blur zipped down the inside of his robes. "Professor Moody!" she exclaimed in horror, her voice sharp and commanding. What are you doing?" "Teaching," Moody replied calmly, as if nothing about launching a ferret into a teenage boy's trousers was the least bit odd. "Teaching him a lesson," McGonagall was appalled. "We never use transfiguration as a punishment. Surely Dumbledore told you that?" "He might have mentioned it," Moody said, without apology, finally retrieving the now thoroughly traumatized ferret and transforming it back into a very shaken Draco Malfoy. The boy lay crumpled on the floor, gasping for breath, his platinum hair disheveled, his pride in tatters. He looked around wildly as if trying to process how he, of all people, had become the butt of the joke. It's easy to understand why this moment has become one of the most beloved among readers. It wasn't just the absurdity of the act itself, it was the rare sight of Draco Malfoy getting exactly what he deserved in a way that felt more symbolic than disciplinary. He wasn't just punished, he was humiliated, deconstructed, transformed into something harmless and ridiculous. For once, no house points, no detentions, no polite scolding, just poetic justice by way of wand flick. In the film adaptation, this entire sequence is reduced to a single gag. Draco is turned into a ferret and bounces around a little. The deeper humor, the building tension, the brilliant escalation, it's all stripped away. Gone is the moment when Moody hurls him into Crabbe's pants. Gone is the look of horror on McGonagall's face. Gone is the explosion of laughter from the Gryffindors and even the uneasy amusement of nearby Slytherins. And most tragically, gone is the subtle layer of foreshadowing, because the real Mad-Eye Moody would never do this. But Barty Crouch Jr., he absolutely would. There's also an eerie darkness underneath the comedy. Barty Crouch Jr., a Death Eater, had been carefully planting seeds of chaos within Hogwarts from the very beginning. And while this prank was genuinely hilarious, it also revealed just how reckless and unhinged this Moody could be. "He seems to be enjoying this a bit too much," Harry notes in the book. And indeed, there's a fine line between poetic justice and dangerous excess that the students, and even McGonagall, weren't sure whether to laugh or intervene speaks volumes about the power imbalance in a world governed by magic. And Draco, of course, never forgot it. In later chapters, he carries a wary dislike of Moody, his usual cockiness slightly tempered when the professor is around. Even for someone as arrogant as Malfoy, being turned into a small, defenseless creature and manhandled in front of an audience is not easily forgotten. For a moment he got a taste of what it felt like to be vulnerable. It was the closest thing he'd had to a reality check. The moment also gave readers a rare glimpse into the hierarchy of justice at Hogwarts. Dumbledore often leaned toward mercy. McGonagall preferred order, Snape dished out bias, but Moody, or rather the imposter, delivered a brutal form of fairness that bypassed bureaucracy entirely. It was primitive, immediate, and wildly entertaining. And though it was later revealed to be the work of a madman, fans couldn't help but cheer. Even years after the book's release, fans discussed this moment with affection and regret. affection because it was a brilliant scene of well-earned comeuppance, regret because the movie failed to do it justice. Why didn't they keep the whole ferret scene is a common refrain among readers. The answer, likely, is time or tone, or perhaps fear that audiences wouldn't find a magical animal prank as hilarious as Rowling clearly intended. But those who read it know better. It was one of the few moments where the cruelty of Hogwarts students collided head-on with unpredictable justice, and the result was unforgettable. "Think it's funny, do you?" Moody growled when a Hufflepuff began to laugh. But the irony was that yes, it was funny. It was uncomfortably, wildly funny. The way Ferret Draco flailed in mid-air, the way Crabbe yelped, the way McGonagall flustered over school policy. It was all absurd and surreal, and yet somehow grounded in the very real emotional satisfaction of seeing a bully get taken down a notch. This moment reminds us of the raw magic and mischief that fills the corners of the Harry Potter universe. It's not just about wands and potions, it's about consequences, chaos, and the unpredictability of power. Draco Malfoy, proud son of Lucius, found himself literally stripped of control, dignity, and identity in front of half the school, and it was hilarious. What made it even better was how quickly things snapped back to normal. Once turned back into a boy, Draco wasn't offered a hug or apology. He was simply expected to get up and walk it off. No magical therapist, no follow-up meeting with Dumbledore. Just the harsh, whimsical justice of a magical world where one moment you're smirking and the next you're squeaking. In the end, the ferret scene stands not just as comic relief, but as a microcosm of the larger themes in Rowling's work: justice, transformation, and the duality of power. It gave readers something to laugh at, yes, but it also gave them something to think about. Because in a world where anyone can become anything with a flick of a wand, nothing is ever as permanent or as safe as it seems. And so, fans continue to quote it, reenact it, and laugh about it year after year. Because no matter how many Dark Lords rise or how many Horcruxes must be destroyed, would always have that ferret. Number 23. Harry gets a quill stuck to his lips. It was one of those evenings at Hogwarts when the corridors felt heavier, when even the whispers of portraits seemed to carry tension. The Ministry of Magic was breathing down Harry's neck. Dolores Umbridge ruled the school with her quill of blood, and every owl that arrived brought more dread than comfort. The walls of the Gryffindor common room, usually a sanctuary, now closed in like a cage. It was in such a moment, tucked behind a mound of homework, that Harry Potter, the boy who lived the chosen one, the subject of whispering headlines and venomous articles, did something so absurdly human it made the world stop for a moment and simply laugh. He had been staring at his parchment for hours, the text swimming before his eyes. Professor McGonagall had assigned 3 feet on transfiguration theory, Professor Snape wanted a potion essay by the next morning, and Professor Binns, as usual, hadn't bothered checking if students were alive before assigning them endless historical analysis. But worst of all was the looming threat of another detention with Umbridge, where he'd be forced to write lines with that cursed quill that carved the words into his skin. The very thought of it made his fingers twitch with phantom pain. Harry's frustration had reached a boiling point. He had just finished crossing out his 3rd attempt at summarizing vanishment spells when his hand jerked, knocking over his ink bottle. The black liquid poured across the table like a spreading shadow, staining notes, parchment, and, most notably, the feather of his quill. In his distraction and fatigue, Harry grabbed the quill absent-mindedly and, without thinking, brought it to his lips. Perhaps it was an unconscious habit, like when someone bites their nails under stress. But this time, the result was spectacularly ridiculous. The ink had made the feather sticky, and as Harry clenched the base of the quill between his teeth, The end fluttered up and adhered directly to his upper lip. The sensation was strange, ticklish, cold, and mildly itchy. Still, he didn't register the absurdity of the situation immediately. Instead, he continued chewing thoughtfully, eyes fixed on the essay, until a strange silence fell upon the table. Ron Weasley, who had been battling his own charms assignment, looked up first. His expression twisted into confusion, then amusement. "Mate," he said, his voice trembling, "you've got a thing on your face." Hermione Granger glanced over, her hand halfway to her inkpot, and then froze. Her eyebrows rose in alarm, her lips parted, and then, despite her best efforts, she let out a sudden burst of laughter. Harry looked up. "What?" he mumbled, the quill still attached to his mouth. He reached up to remove it, and here the comedy truly began. The feather, stubborn and now slightly dried by the heat of his breath, refused to come off. He tugged gently, then harder. It held firm. A small frown of determination crept onto his face. "Blimey!" Ron wheezed, doubling over. "He's got a bloody moustache!" It was the kind of moment that broke the tension like a charm. Laughter erupted from the trio, loud and unstoppable. Hermione tried to speak, but her words dissolved into giggles. Even Crookshanks, curled up on a nearby chair, lifted his head in disapproval at the ruckus. For once, even the looming shadows of the Ministry's propaganda couldn't keep them down. Harry, still struggling with the quill, tried to maintain his dignity. "Ish noth funny," he muttered through clenched lips, sounding like he had a mouthful of treacle tart. He gave one last desperate yank, and with a wet smack, the feather came off, leaving behind a black smudge across his mouth and a thoroughly humiliated savior of the wizarding world. What made this moment so brilliant was its simplicity. Here was Harry, the boy burdened with prophecy and prophecy breakers, sitting in his school jumper, black ink on his lips, while his two best friends laughed until their sides hurt. It was a crack in the facade, a reminder that beneath the weight of the world and its expectations, there was still a teenager just trying to survive his 5th year. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, J.K. Rowling offers this scene as a passing beat of levity, a moment of comic relief that never feels forced. It doesn't come with a setup or punchline, it just happens, and that's what makes it so memorable. The humour is organic, like a window into a real dorm room at midnight where too much homework has turned everyone slightly mad. Though it doesn't appear as a major plot point, this moment serves a greater purpose in the emotional arc of the story. It reminds us that Harry, despite the horrors he's seen and the darkness pressing in from all sides, is still capable of silly mistakes. It's that human thread that keeps him grounded and relatable. He's not a myth, he's a boy with a feather stuck to his lip. The trio's laughter that night was more than just a reaction to a ridiculous sight. It was a much-needed breath of fresh air, a brief respite from the suffocating presence of Dolores Umbridge and the chilling whispers about Lord Voldemort. It was a return to friendship, to innocence, to the very essence of what made Hogwarts home. Harry's own reaction was priceless. Once he managed to clean the ink from his face, thanks to Hermione's quick use of Scourgify, he sank into his chair, blushing furiously but smiling. "Well, at least I didn't stick my wand up my nose," he said dryly, prompting a new round of laughter. That self-deprecating wit was what kept Harry from falling apart. His ability to mock his own misfortunes, however minor, gave him a strange kind of resilience. It's easy to forget how young they all were in Order of the Phoenix. 15? Just 15. And yet expected to fight wars, endure torture, challenge authority. The feather on the lip scene was a jolt back to reality. that these were still kids, navigating not only the threats outside the castle walls, but the chaos of adolescence itself. Interestingly, Rowling doesn't dwell on this moment in the text. It passes quickly, like a breeze, but leaves a lasting impression. It's the kind of detail that could be missed on a first read, but glows brighter with each revisit. He stuck the inky end of the quill in his mouth without thinking, and immediately regretted it. That's all it takes. One sentence to create an image so vivid, readers carry it with them long after the book is closed. And in the visual imagination of readers, the scene often grows. One can picture the ink dribbling down his chin, Hermione rushing for her wand, Ron collapsing against a cushion in helpless laughter. It's as if Rowling painted just the outlines and we filled in the rest with colour. Moments like this help define the heart of the Harry Potter series. Not the battles or prophecies, but the silliness, the shared joy, the moments where even a hero is brought low by a rogue feather and a lapse in attention. These instances tether the extraordinary to the ordinary. It's important to note that these scenes are never played for mockery. Rowling never makes Harry the butt of the joke in a cruel way. Instead, she invites the reader to laugh with him, not at him. It's communal. Even when he's embarrassed, Harry is part of the moment, not isolated from it. That sense of togetherness is vital. The feather incident wasn't just a funny mistake, it was a reaffirmation of friendship. In the face of the cruel machinery of the Ministry, of Umbridge's detentions and Dumbledore's cold avoidance, Ron and Hermione's laughter brought Harry back from the edge. For just a minute, they were safe. And it wasn't the last time something like this happened. From Ron's crushed wand in Chamber of Secrets to Hermione's accidental transformation into a half-cat in Chamber of Secrets, these moments are part of a long tradition in the series where mistakes become memories. They don't detract from the character's strength, they deepen them. For fans, this particular scene became a cult favourite. It's quoted, memed, referenced in fan art. Why? Because it's real, because we've all done something embarrassing at the worst possible time. Maybe not with a quill and ink, but perhaps with toothpaste on our shirt before a meeting or tripping in public. And if Harry Potter can make a fool of himself and still save the wizarding world, maybe we're not doing so badly. The feather moment is the kind of story friends tell years later with fondness. Remember the time you got ink on your face? Remember how you panicked? Remember how we couldn't breathe from laughing? It becomes folklore in friendship, a shared mythology. Harry probably wouldn't list that night among his top accomplishments, but perhaps he should. Because in that moment, he didn't feel like the chosen one. He felt like a boy, surrounded by friends, laughing till his sides ached, alive. And sometimes that's more important than winning a war. Number 24, feeding Norbert mandarins. In the dusky warmth of Hagrid's wooden hut nestled just at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, one of the most absurdly endearing episodes of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone unfolded in pure chaos and smoke. Norbert, a newly hatched Norwegian ridgeback dragon, sat in a makeshift crate, eyes glinting like molten gold, his scaled body barely able to stay still as he writhed with wild energy. His thin wings flapped with alarming frequency, and every now and then he let out a snort that sent sparks flying onto the rough floor. And amidst it all stood Rubeus Hagrid, half-giant, gamekeeper, and now self-proclaimed Dragon Daddy, holding a baby bottle filled with warm mandarin juice. The scene was, without exaggeration, pure comedy stitched into fantasy. Hagrid, with his tangled beard, pink umbrella tucked under one arm, cooed lovingly at the snarling beast as if it were a newborn lamb. "He's just a baby, he doesn't mean no harm," he murmured, thrusting the bottle toward Norbert's gaping maw. The dragon hissed, snapped, and let out a hiccup that sent a curl of flame licking up the side of Hagrid's coat. "There, there, Norbert, don't get cranky. We'll have you fed in a moment." Harry, Ron, and Hermione, pressed together on the cramped couch, watched in disbelief. "He's mad," Ron whispered under his breath, inching slightly away as Norbert let out another puff of smoke. "Completely mental." The absurdity of it all is what made the scene so unforgettable in the book, though unfortunately it was nearly erased from the film. Rowling gave us something rare in fantasy fiction, a moment so comically human that it bordered on satire. In Hagrid's blind affection, readers could feel a kind of innocence, even as danger roared and snapped its teeth a few feet away. What stood out wasn't just the idea of feeding a dragon from a bottle. It was what was inside the bottle, mandarin juice. Hagrid had apparently read somewhere, though who knows where, that dragon hatchlings liked citrus. He was convinced it was healthy for Norbert. "Got to give him vitamin C," he said proudly, offering the bottle with both hands as if it were a goblet of elvish nectar. Norbert didn't appreciate the gesture. He bit the bottle in half. The shards clattered to the ground as juice spilled across the crate, soaking into the straw. Norbert hissed and immediately tried to set it on fire. Hagrid, flustered but undeterred, patted his side with a massive hand. "Temper, temper," he muttered. "Must be his teething. Poor wee thing." "Poor wee thing?" Hermione yelped, ducking as a spark sizzled past her hair. "Hagrid! He just bit through glass." But Hagrid remained unshakable in his devotion. He rocked the dragon as if it were a colicky toddler, humming lullabies between curses as Norbert thrashed and singed the curtains. There was a strange tenderness to it, a twisted image of fatherhood dressed in scorched sleeves and citrus pulp. This entire scene exists in Chapter 14 of Philosopher's Stone, aptly titled Norbert the Norwegian Ridgeback. In Rowling's exact words, Hagrid was bending over the fire, and on the floor in front of it was a huge black egg. By the time Norbert hatches, Hagrid is so enamored that he loses all sense of reality. "Isn't he beautiful?" he sighs. And later, as the dragon grows, his parenting style veers into the truly bizarre. The book continues. It bit Hagrid's finger, which was now bandaged and bleeding, but Hagrid was delighted with it. There's an element of dark humour here, a danger that Hagrid sees as cuteness. It's a recurring trait for him, but in Norbert's case, it nearly costs him his job, his health, and possibly the lives of 3 students. Harry's perspective grounds the scene in tense hilarity. He notes how quickly Norbert becomes unmanageable. He was now eating dead rats by the crate and roaring at the top of his lungs every night. But Hagrid wasn't fazed. He remained committed to feeding Norbert, and the Mandarin fiasco was only one of many peculiar methods he employed. Later, it's mentioned that he tried to teach Norbert tricks. "I've been trying to teach him not to bit, and he knows me now, he really does." But the Mandarin bottle moment stands out because it represents something far more layered than just a funny scene. It's the culmination of Hagrid's blind love colliding with magical irresponsibility. He sees Norbert as a child, his child, and that illusion drives every choice he makes, even if it means feeding acidic citrus to a fire-breathing monster. The tension between absurdity and danger is what makes the scene shine. Ron ends up with a bitten hand. The trio nearly gets caught multiple times, and the noise threatens to bring every professor in Hogwarts down upon Hagrid's hut. But still, he refuses to give Norbert up. The sight of him preparing bottles of juice, humming lullabies, and dabbing the dragon's snout with a damp cloth could have come from a surreal parody of childcare manuals. "You can't give up on your own baby," Hagrid says at one point. And there it is, the heartbreaking truth behind the comedy. Hagrid wants a family. He wants something to care for, something to raise, something to love, and he finds that in a dragon that bites, burns, and belches smoke. The mandarin bottle becomes a symbol of that hope, a doomed attempt to nurture the untamable. There's something poetic in that, the way Hagrid fights nature itself, armed only with fruit juice and oversized mittens. Even Norbert seems confused. One moment he's gnawing the side of the crate, the next he's being burped like a baby. Rowling masterfully builds this cognitive dissonance into the dragon's behavior. He banged his tail against the wall, sending a chair flying. And yet, Hagrid merely chuckles. He's a feisty one, eh? This dynamic makes the scene one of the richest in the first book, and it's a shame the film adaptation reduced Norbert to a minor plot device. In the film, Norbert hatches, Hagrid beams, and then the story moves on. But in the book, he's a living, breathing presence for several chapters, a hazard, a joke, and a source of unexpected empathy. The feeding sessions, especially the Mandarin incident, show how far Hagrid is willing to go in the name of love. He burns his fingers, loses sleep, endangers his students, and still smiles through it. "Norbert loves me," he says at one point, utterly convinced. "I'm his mum." That line, "I'm his mum," is both hilarious and profoundly touching. In a world filled with broken families, orphans, and distant guardians, Hagrid's stubborn affection, however misguided, is a rare constant. And it all peaks in moments like these. Him trying to shove a glass bottle of juice into a dragon's snapping jaw, utterly undeterred by singed eyebrows. The scene also adds depth to the trio's growing friendship. Harry, Ron, and Hermione rally around Hagrid not just because it's the right thing to do, but because they care about him. They help with the feeding, dodge the fire, and even risk detention to make sure Norbert is safely sent away. Their shared exasperation becomes part of their bond. "I can't believe we're doing this," Hermione mutters as Norbert claws at the window. "We could be expelled." In truth, they could have been worse than expelled, but that's what made their actions noble. They didn't abandon Hagrid when he acted irrationally. They stepped in, became co-parents of a dragon for a short, chaotic time. And in that crucible of madness, they became something like family themselves. Norbert eventually leaves for Romania, and Hagrid is heartbroken, but those bizarre, Mandarin-soaked memories linger like a warm bruise. "He'll be happy there," Harry says gently. Hagrid nods, sniffling. "Yeah, but I'll miss him." The whole arc, so full of noise, danger, and sweetness, is one of Rowling's finest early juggling acts of tone. Comedy, pathos, and tension dance around a crate holding a furious baby dragon, and at its heart, the most absurd image, a giant man holding a baby bottle, whispering lullabies to something that breathes fire. In another world, perhaps, Norbert could have grown up with Hagrid, become a domesticated dragon in a pumpkin patch. But in Philosopher's Stone, the bottle of mandarin juice becomes both a farce and a farewell. It tells us everything we need to know about Hagrid, his heart too big, his logic too thin, and his love dangerously pure. Number 25. Harry tries to do homework at Sirius's place. The walls of number 12, Grimmauld Place, were steeped in shadow and memory. Thick, velvet curtains sagged on the windows, choking out the daylight. Ancient portraits whispered and cursed, while the musty air seemed to carry the sighs of generations long gone. Somewhere within this gloom, Harry Potter sat hunched over a battered table, a length of parchment before him, and a quill clutched in his ink-stained fingers. His potions essay lay unfinished, and his nerves, already strained by dreams of long corridors and locked doors, were fraying rapidly. "Are you sure you don't want a butterbeer first?" Sirius Black's voice broke through the silence, or what should have been silence. He lounged nearby in an armchair that had once belonged to his mother, legs draped over the armrest, a smirk tugging at his lips. "You look like you could use one. Actually, two. Writing about Bezoars can't be that thrilling." Harry didn't look up. "I just need to finish this one paragraph," he muttered, scribbling furiously. But the moment the words began to form in his mind, a sharp thwack filled the room. Bam, 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 followed by a hoot of protest. Beneath the windowsill, Hedwig fluttered angrily in her cage. "Bloody owl!" Creature snarled from the corner. The ancient house elf had appeared moments ago, shuffling in with a tray of teacups he had no intention of offering to anyone. His muttering had begun the moment he entered, and showed no signs of stopping. Filthy half-blood sitting in Mistress's sacred chair, defiling her furniture, betraying his own blood. Harry flinched and pressed harder with his quill. Ink spattered across the parchment, ruining the sentence he'd just written. He groaned. "Maybe if you wrote a bit about Snape's hair," Sirius suggested helpfully, tossing a dung bomb up and down in one hand. "I mean, it is greasy enough to be used in potions. That counts, doesn't it?" "Sirius," Harry said through gritted teeth, "please, I need to finish this." "But Harry," Sirius replied, the dung bomb now balanced on his nose, "you're wasting a perfectly good afternoon. We could duel, or you could help me clean out the attic. I found a ghoul up there with your name on it." Harry dropped his quill. "I have to turn this in by Monday. If I don't, Snape will—" "What, deduct points? Give you detention? Look at you with those black shark eyes?" Sirius rolled his own eyes dramatically. "Honestly, I don't know why you let that overgrown bat scare you." "He hates me." "He hates everyone. That's his thing." "Well, except for my dear cousin Narcissa." Sirius sat up straighter, mock solemn. He always did have a thing for blondes. Tragic, really. From the shadows, Creature dropped a spoon with a sharp clang. "Mistress Narcissa, true daughter of the House of Black. Not like the blood traitor who crack!" Creature vanished before Sirius could throw the dung bomb at him. Harry, however, was now staring miserably at his parchment. The sentence, "The main properties of Bezoars are," was followed by a giant ink blot. He rubbed his forehead, feeling the beginnings of a headache blooming behind his eyes. "You know," Sirius said, leaning forward, "you're just like James. He never studied either. Drove McGonagall up the wall. Of course Remus always covered for him." "I am studying," Harry snapped, more sharply than he intended. The room fell quiet for a moment, save for the continued rustling of Hedwig's feathers and the occasional groan of the ancient house settling into its creaky bones. Sirius looked away, jaw tightening. The resemblance to James, once a point of joy, had become a wound lately, one that Harry knew was deepening with every passing day, spent locked away in this suffocating house. "I'm sorry," Harry said quickly, ashamed. Snape's already on my back, and this place is driving me mad." Sirius stood up and walked to the window, pulling aside the heavy curtain just a fraction. Dust spiraled in the light. "You and me both, kid," he murmured. Harry reached again for his quill, determined to at least complete one coherent thought. But the moment he touched the parchment, the silence shattered. Hedwig hooted, Creature's muttering returned from the hallway, and Sirius turned from the window with a fresh round of commentary. "You know, Slughorn always had the best stories about Bezoars. He once told us about this prince, Sirius, who swallowed poison on purpose just to impress a girl." Sirius. "And she didn't even like him. Can you believe that? Spent a fortune on a Bezoar, nearly died, and she married his brother." "Sirius!" Sirius laughed, finally throwing himself back into the armchair. All right, I'll shut up. No more talking." He mimed, zipping his lips shut, locking them, and throwing away the key. Harry began to write again. The essay was supposed to cover the usage of bezoars in potion making, their historical discovery, and their limitations as antidotes. He had 3 scrolls worth of notes from Hermione, who had graciously summarized every relevant textbook in existence. But reading them now with serious humming, "God rest ye merry hippogriffs" under his breath, felt like trying to study in the middle of a Quidditch match. He glanced up. Sirius was tapping his foot rhythmically. "That's still making noise," Harry said. Sirius opened his mouth but caught Harry's glare and threw up his hands. "Fine, I'm going upstairs to brood in peace. You clearly want to suffer." Harry let out a breath as Sirius exited. Creature's grumbling faded down the corridor, and for one shining moment the room held its breath. Harry dipped his quill and began again. Bezoars are stones taken from the stomach of a goat and are used to save someone who has been poisoned. A loud bang echoed through the house. "What are you doing with that portrait, you blood traitor? That is my flesh, my blood!" came the shrieking voice of Walburga Black from the hallway. Harry let his forehead fall onto the table. When Sirius reappeared minutes later, hair singed from a failed silencing charm on his mother's portrait, he looked apologetic. "She's particularly lively today. Think she misses Creature." Harry muttered something unintelligible. Sirius plopped back down. "All right, no jokes, no singing, no tapping?" He paused. "Can I breathe?" Harry gave him a tired smile. Barely. The absurdity of it all was not lost on either of them. Here was the boy who lived, hero of the prophecy, struggling not against Death Eaters or dark curses, but against noise, nonsense, and a house filled with ghosts of the past, literal and metaphorical. And Sirius Black, once the most dangerous man in Britain according to the Ministry, reduced to a grumpy roommate with cabin fever. "You know," Sirius said thoughtfully, "we should get out, just once. You, me, maybe Remus. Go flying over the moors, camp out somewhere, forget about essays and prophecies for a bit." "I'd like that," Harry said honestly. But he didn't stop writing. By the time dinner rolled around, an undercooked affair prepared half-heartedly by Creature, the essay was nearly done. Harry had written more in that cramped, miserable hour than he had all week. It wasn't his best work, but it was done, and that felt like a victory. "You survived," Sirius said with mock solemnity, raising his goblet. "To academic heroism in the face of chaos." Harry laughed, feeling, for the first time in days, a little lighter. Later that night, in the same room with the same shadows, Sirius fell asleep in his chair, wand clutched in one hand like a forgotten sword. Harry watched him for a moment, realizing how much of Sirius's soul had been chipped away in this house. They were both prisoners in their own way, one by blood, one by prophecy. And yet, amid the madness, there was warmth. There was Hedwig finally asleep. There was the scent of parchment and ink. And there was the sound. Blessed, beautiful silence. Harry finished the last line of his essay and leaned back, finally at peace. But somewhere in the house, Creature cursed again, and Walburga shrieked, and Sirius snored loud enough to wake the dead. And somehow Harry smiled. Number 26. The Hermione Army joke. Of all the moments scattered across the pages of the Harry Potter series, few shine with such understated charm as the fleeting but unforgettable mention of the so-called Hermione's Army. It wasn't an official club, it wasn't even a real plan, it was a jest, a brilliant moment of levity, born in the cramped quarters of a Gryffindor common room, steeped in sarcasm and friendship. And yet, this single line, hidden within the chapters of the Goblet of Fire, reveals more about the trio's dynamic than many of the louder, more dramatic moments ever could. It was during the 4th year, and the atmosphere was heavy. The Triwizard Tournament loomed over Hogwarts like an ominous shadow. Harry was drowning in uncertainty after being forced into a competition he never wanted. Ron was still brooding, distant, wounded by jealousy. And Hermione, ever the voice of reason and order, did what she always did. She organized, she read, she explained, and, as Ron would claim, she lectured. Her commitment to understanding every rule, every spell, and every loophole in the tournament's design was both infuriating and endearing. To Harry, she was a lighthouse, to Ron sometimes a nag. But neither could deny how much they depended on her. It was after one of those long evenings with Hermione pacing back and forth, a copy of Hogwarts, a history in her arms, and magical water plants of the Mediterranean open on the table, that Ron's voice cut through the room. "You know what this is, don't you?" he exclaimed, dramatically dropping his quill. "It's the Hermione Granger Army. Only we're in it, me and Harry, and we don't get to leave. No holidays, no escape." Harry chuckled tiredly. Hermione paused, lips pressed together, eyes narrowed. For a moment, they all waited. Would she scold him again? Instead, she gave a soft snort, the hint of a smile curling at her lips. "At least I'm not making you polish armor or duel hinky-punks," she said, with mock severity. "If you're in my army, you'll do things properly, starting with reading the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 4, thoroughly this time." The trio burst into laughter, and for a flicker of a moment, the weight of the year lifted. The war, the prophecy, even the looming second task, all vanished, replaced by the familiar safety of their friendship. That moment, that joke about the Hermione Army, was never meant to be remembered. It was tossed into the text like a throwaway line. But it echoes, because within it lies a hidden truth. Hermione Granger had always led them, not through bravado or spells, not through fame or fortune, but through fierce loyalty and relentless knowledge. Long before Dumbledore's army had its first meeting in the Room of Requirement, long before Neville stood tall and Ginny cast stinging hexes, there was Hermione, a quiet revolutionary armed with books, courage, and a sharpened sense of justice. Consider the tasks they faced that year, when Harry was nearly crushed by the Hungarian horntail in the first task, who practiced summoning charms with him late into the night. "Accio Firebolt," he shouted again and again, his wand trembling. And it worked, not just because of magic, but because of Hermione's coaching, her voice in his head, her discipline in his wand movement. Without her, that dragon would have been a death sentence. And when the second task approached and Harry had no idea what lay beneath the Black Lake, who combed the library for answers? Who forced him to bathe with his egg? Who ran breathless through the snow to hand him magical water plants at the last possible moment? Ron may have been the one to crack jokes, but Hermione was the one who cracked codes. In every crisis, she stood ready, not just with spells, but with strategy. The army of Hermione was not fiction. It was real, forged in every moment she refused to let them fail. Yet what made that army so disarming, so utterly human, was its humour. Their friendship was not perfect. It was filled with bickering and eye-rolls, sarcasm and snark. Ron, especially, never missed a chance to mock Hermione's obsession with rules. "You're going to get us all killed, or worse, expelled," he had once said in The Philosopher's Stone, only for Hermione to gasp, "She needs to sort out her priorities." And indeed, her priorities, justice, truth, preparation, often made her the butt of jokes. But underneath those quips was reverence. They trusted her. They followed her. When Umbridge darkened the halls of Hogwarts with her saccharine cruelty and pink tyranny, it was Hermione who conceived the real army. Dumbledore's army may have carried another's name, but its heart beat with Hermione's fire. She sought out the Room of Requirement, conjured the master list, even charmed it with a jinx in case of betrayal. "It's sort of exciting, isn't it?" she admitted to Harry, her eyes sparkling. "Breaking the rules." For the girl who once obeyed every page in every book, this was her battle cry. This was her revolution. But before all of that, before the meetings and patronuses, there had been that teasing line, that imaginary army, a prophecy almost, a foreshadowing in jest. And while Ron said it in exasperation, there was a grain of truth in his voice. "Only we're in it," he had said. Because truly, Hermione's crusade wasn't for the whole school. Not then. It was for her friends, for Harry with his scar and his burden, for Ron with his insecurities and brave heart. She carried them both like a commander who refused to let her soldiers fall. Even when the world turned on Harry, when the Daily Prophet smeared his name and Fudge denied Voldemort's return, Hermione stood by him. She challenged Rita Skeeter, tracked her as a beetle, captured her, and blackmailed her into silence. "You're vile," Skeeter had spat. "You have no idea how vile I can be," Hermione whispered, with the kind of steel that comes only from pure, unwavering conviction. That was not the voice of a schoolgirl. That was the voice of a general. There are other armies in the wizarding world. There are Auras and Death Eaters, the Order of the Phoenix, and the Knights of Walpurgis. But none are as enduring, as emotionally resonant as Hermione's. Because hers was an army of the mind, one forged in knowledge, in truth, in the defense of the misunderstood and the mistreated. She fought for house elves. She founded SPEW, an organization that everyone mocked, even Harry and Ron. But she never backed down. "Just because it's taking a long time doesn't mean we're not doing anything," she insisted. This passion, this clarity, it was relentless. And yes, sometimes it was overbearing. Sometimes Ron exploded. "You've got dirt on your nose, by the way, did you know?" But even his insults were colored with affection, because Hermione never needed to charm anyone with lies. Her power was honesty. Her gift was understanding. She was the friend who remembered your schedule, who did your homework when you were ill, who knew what you needed before you asked. In a way, Hermione's army never ended. It simply grew. Luna joined. Neville found courage. Ginny found fire. Even Cho, awkward and grieving, found a home among them. But the foundation remained the same. A girl with a time-turner, a book bag bursting with ink-stained parchment, and an unshakable belief that knowledge could save the world. Harry may have been the chosen one, but Hermione was the one who chose, every time, to stand beside him. It is a mistake to think of leadership only in terms of grandeur. Real leadership is in the details. It's in the quiet hours of studying while others sleep. It's in the extra cloak she packed because she knew Ron would forget his. It's in the fierce protection she gave to those she loved, even when they didn't deserve it. "I'm hoping to do some good in the world," she declared in Deathly Hallows, her voice trembling with purpose. And she did, more than she would ever allow herself to take credit for. The joke about Hermione's army lives on because, deep down, we all recognize its truth. We all knew that if she had started a club, it would have thrived, not because she was the loudest or the flashiest, but because she cared the most. She was the kind of leader who earned loyalty not through fear or charisma, but through consistency, through presence, through being the one person you could count on, no matter the storm. In retrospect, perhaps Ron's words were not sarcasm at all, but prophecy. "Only we're in it," he had said, but the truth is, anyone who ever stood beside Hermione, anyone who ever learned from her, anyone who ever found strength in her wisdom, they were all soldiers in her invisible army. We still are. For in a world of curses and chaos, dark lords and dementors, Hermione Granger stood armed with nothing but her intelligence, her fire, and her love. And that, more than any wand or prophecy, changed everything. Number 27, Dumbledore talks about knitting. The wind was cold that night in Budleigh Babberton. The streets were silent, save for the soft crunch of leaves beneath Harry's feet and the occasional rustle of wind along the hedges. Standing beside Albus Dumbledore, Harry waited as the headmaster rapped on the door of an ordinary-looking cottage. Inside, they knew, was Professor Horace Slughorn, hiding from the world and pretending to be an armchair. But just before the door opened, a peculiar moment unfolded, one that lasted only seconds, but has lingered in readers' hearts for years. "Would you like to sit down?" Harry asked politely. "No, thank you," Dumbledore replied, then added with the utmost seriousness, "I love knitting patterns, very calming. That line, nestled quietly in Chapter 4 of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, is vintage Dumbledore, enigmatic, whimsical, gently absurd. It arrives completely unannounced, unexpected, and unrelated to the moment at hand. And yet it feels perfectly placed. This is Dumbledore in his truest, most human form, not the towering figure of legend, not the brilliant strategist of wizarding wars, but the man who loves lemon drops, wears high-heeled boots, and finds joy in the rhythm of knitting. There is a kind of magic that has nothing to do with wands. Dumbledore possesses this too, the magic of being wholly himself, regardless of who is watching. That single line about knitting is more than just comic relief. It's a moment of intimacy, a glimpse behind the curtain into a personality that resists classification. The films regrettably chose to flatten this aspect of Dumbledore, focusing more on his gravitas than his quirks. But in the books, J.K. Rowling scattered breadcrumbs of delightful eccentricity, and this is one of the finest. What makes this line so resonant? Perhaps it's the sincerity with which it's delivered. Dumbledore isn't trying to be funny. He's not teasing Harry or deflecting with humour. He's just sharing a piece of himself, quietly, almost absently. The way one might mention they enjoy crossword puzzles or bird-watching. And because it comes from a man as powerful and revered as Dumbledore, it creates a striking contrast, a reminder that even legends have soft spots. Let us not forget, this is the same man who calmly told Harry in the Philosopher's Stone that he saw thick woolen socks in the mirror of Erised. Most readers laughed, assuming it was a joke, but in hindsight it feels more like a gentle nudge, an indication that Dumbledore's longings were not for power or prestige, but for comfort, warmth, and perhaps the simplicity of a life he never got to live. Maybe even the act of knitting, a loop after loop of meditative calm, held for him a fragment of that peace. In fact, Dumbledore's love for the mundane is one of his most charming traits. It's seen in the way he names passwords after sweets, sherbet lemon, cockroach cluster, acid pops, and how he cheerfully offers snacks in the middle of serious conversations. He is a man who balances the unbearable weight of memory with the levity of absurd detail. And perhaps in that lies the reason he treasures knitting, not because it is silly, but because it is grounding. In The Half-Blood Prince, this moment occurs just after Harry has been rescued from the Dursleys. He's still reeling from the events of the previous year, the death of Sirius, the growing fear of Voldemort's return, the weight of prophecy. Standing next to Dumbledore outside Slughorn's borrowed cottage, Harry is reminded that the man beside him is not just a leader in a time of war, but someone who embraces the quiet pleasures of life. It is a subtle lesson, but an important one. There must always be room for joy, even in dark times. The films, as visually rich as they are, often missed these character moments. In Michael Gambon's portrayal, Dumbledore is more austere, even severe. There is little room for the Dumbledore who wore flamboyant robes, who once tried knitting a gift for his pet phoenix, or who laughed at his own bad puns. Gone are the warm absurdities that made him feel more like a beloved, if slightly mad uncle, than a distant icon. The knitting line It didn't make the cut. But in the books, this side of Dumbledore is woven delicately throughout. When he arrives at Privet Drive in Order of the Phoenix, he sits in the Dursleys' living room and cheerfully offers them a drink conjured from mid-air, unbothered by their hostility. "Ah, good evening," he says with the calm of someone visiting old friends. "You must be the Dursleys." He treats every moment with equal gravity and lightness, a balance only he seems capable of maintaining. Even when discussing matters of life and death, Dumbledore often surprises Harry with a comment that seems comically misplaced. In Goblet of Fire, as the Triwizard Tournament looms, he refers to it as a very exciting time for the school, delightfully unpredictable. When Cornelius Fudge refuses to acknowledge Voldemort's return, Dumbledore simply sighs and says, "You are blinded by the love of the office you hold." But moments later he is conjuring a phoenix, Patronus, and murmuring about the madness of crowds with the air of a weary philosopher. It is this tapestry of contradictions that makes him so beloved. Dumbledore is the architect of resistance, the keeper of secrets, and yet also the man who wears a bonnet to a Christmas party, who takes delight in knitting patterns, who tells Harry quite seriously that he's always wanted a pair of dragon-hide gloves. In these contradictions we see a fuller human being, one who has suffered deeply but still chooses joy. Why knitting? There's no concrete answer. Rowling never elaborates beyond that one line, but in the act of knitting there is patience, quiet repetition, the creation of something from almost nothing. Perhaps that was what drew Dumbledore to it. In a world where most things are solved with a flick of the wand, here was an art that demanded time and intention, where one had to work row by row, stitch by stitch. A fitting metaphor for Dumbledore's own life, perhaps, complicated, layered, but ultimately woven into something beautiful. Imagine him in his office late at night, a ball of purple yarn on his lap, quietly looping stitches while Fawkes hums on his perch. The fire crackles, ancient portraits snore, and Dumbledore's hands move with careful rhythm. What might he be knitting? A scarf for a student? A blanket for a friend? Or nothing at all, just knitting for the joy of it? It is tempting to reduce Dumbledore to the role of the wise mentor, the Gandalf, the Merlin, but Rowling resisted that impulse. She gave us a character who was flawed, sometimes frustratingly so. He withheld truths, he orchestrated events from afar, he made mistakes, grave ones, but he also loved sweet things, wore ridiculous socks and enjoyed knitting. These contradictions make him more real than any single trait ever could. Even in his darkest confessions, Dumbledore retains his peculiar tone. When he tells Harry about Ariana, his sister, whose tragic death shattered the Dumbledore family, his words are laced with sorrow, yes, but also self-awareness. "I was gifted," he says. "I was brilliant. I wanted to escape. I wanted to shine. I wanted glory." There is no pretense, and perhaps that honesty, paired with his eccentricity, is why we trust him, flaws and all. Harry, too, notices this blend. In Deathly Hallows, after Dumbledore's death, Harry is tormented by the things he didn't know. The Rita Skeeter exposés, the shadows of Grindelwald, the buried family secrets. But in the final moments, when he meets Dumbledore again at King's Cross, he finds the man much as he remembered, serene, fond, and still a bit maddening. "Is this real?" Harry asks. "Of course it is happening inside your head, Harry," Dumbledore replies, "but why on earth should that mean that it is not real?" It is a line that echoes the knitting comment in Spirit, strange, whimsical, but disarmingly profound. Dumbledore's wisdom was rarely loud. It tiptoed into a room dressed in absurdity and sat quietly until you noticed its brilliance. That is why a line about knitting can resonate more than a grand speech. It is real, it is unexpected, and it is deeply, unmistakably Dumbledore. In the end, this line serves as a reminder, not just of who Dumbledore was, but of who we are allowed to be. It tells us that softness is not weakness, that the great can still love the small, that even in a world of prophecy, war, and death, there is room for the soothing rhythm of yarn between fingers, that humanity, in all its contradictions, is the most powerful magic of all, and so we treasure it. That single moment, that quiet confession, I love knitting patterns. Very calming. A line like a dropped stitch, easily missed, but never forgotten,